Welcome to this module on getting your property deal and seeing it through to completion. What do we mean by that? Well, first of all, obviously you've got to close the deal, you've got to get to the point where you've agreed what you're going to do and how you're going to purchase. And then the next part, which you might feel is maybe not relevant, is absolutely critical because it's about seeing it through. Because so many deals fall over before they get to completion. And that's why this part of the process is actually just as important as getting the deal in the first place. So what are we going to cover? We're going to look at how you make your offer and what's important within that. We're going to look at how you close the deal and making sure that you get that relationship built and strong enough so that when you do close a deal and you get seller agreement to sell you the property, that even if it's difficult through the completion process, that they stick with you and that you end up being the buyer of that property and there's no gazumping or anything happening within that process. And you might think, well, why is that really important? Well, a lot of deals fall over before they get to completion. And if you've put in all the hard work to get to the point of where you've secured a property investment opportunity, you don't want to lose it through the completion process. And sometimes some of that feels a little bit out of your control. And some people just hand it over to the solicitors and expect that it's all going to happen. And that's absolutely fine. But if it doesn't go quite to plan and the sellers get frustrated and they want to find a buyer and someone comes along and offers them a little bit more, it could be that they then accept that. So let's look at, first of all, the actual offer and getting the deal to the point where you're actually closing the deal. Well, the first thing that we need to look at is putting that verbal offer forward to the vendor so that they can at least consider it and accept it. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to consider within that. If you've just put a number forward to them, let's say that you've decided to offer 80,000 or 100,000 on a property, and it's just a number and you've put that offer forward, that's fine. The sellers might need the 100,000 that you've offered and they might be quite happy to accept that. And that was maybe what they wanted. And you think, well, that's fine, they're going to accept it. What happens if someone else comes along and offers maybe 102? If it's all just based on a number, there's a very strong chance that the seller will then move on to the next buyer. Whereas, if you've built a little bit of a relationship with the seller and you've understood more about what they need and what's important to them, then there's a much stronger chance that even if someone comes along and offers a few £1,000s more, because you've built that relationship and they trust you and they feel confident and believe in you that you're going to complete on the transaction, then there's a stronger chance that they'll stay with you rather than moving just for an extra few £1,000s and that person might pull out during the process. So it's really quite important that you take the time before you offer to fully build that relationship and understand what's important to them. And when you put your offer forward, that you help them see that you've listened, that you explain to them that you want to offer them the £100,000 that they want, because you know that's going to help them move on to their new life, or if there's some ill health or some challenges with the seller and that's why they have to move, that you're going to deal with it as quickly as possible because you can understand why it's important for them to be able to move quickly because of the health situation, and you really put that across in the offer. That will help you get the agreement and help the sellers see that you've understood their situation and they're more likely to believe that you won't let them down because you understand what's going on for them. So when you put that verbal offer forward, it is really important that at that point you have built up more than a relationship of just offering a number. Once you've put the offer forward, I would really recommend that if you're dealing with sellers directly, then you need to get a written agreement. If you're dealing with it through an agent, then the agent will normally do all of the written agreement information directly themselves, and therefore there's not really going to be any need for you to have this level of detailed contact with them. So this is more specifically, this part is around you dealing directly with the seller. I would encourage you to obtain a written agreement. And the reason I say that is not because this is a legally binding document, but there's two reasons. One is that if you get a written agreement, then there's something on paper that says that you've both, if you've signed it, that there's something, personally binding. So for most people, the values that they have is, if they've committed to something, as in I've signed a piece of paper that says I'm going to sell that property to you at this price. And your written agreement can be very simple. It might just simply say the names and addresses of the seller and the buyer and the property that's being purchased and how much it's being purchased for, and perhaps an intended completion date. You might also want to put on that agreement who your solicitors are going to be, so that each party's information is there, and then you sign it and date it. You can then use that agreement to instruct the solicitors on both sides, and then each party solicitors is very aware of the specific information that's been agreed, and it stops any kind of future attempt to negotiate, and it makes it much faster as well to instruct the solicitors. If you're doing a slightly more complex transaction that's got more detail in it, you might, pull together what might historically or traditionally be classed as a heads of terms. So it's all the terms that you've discussed and agreed. So there might be other details in there. If you're perhaps exchanging with a delayed completion in order to do maybe some work on the property, you will detail what's going to happen at exchange, how much is going to be paid on exchange of the documents, and what access you're going to get, what work you're going to do to the property, who's going to do what, and who's liable for each piece, so what insurance cover and things like that. And then when the completion date is going to be, or when it's anticipated to be. So if you're maybe doing it to get planning, is it post-planning permission, and how many days after the planning permission do you intend to complete? So there might be a whole lot of level of detail that you want to put into what you might call a heads of terms. And that makes it really easy for the solicitors to understand what's been agreed. And it makes it a lot easier for them to draw up the contracts. And you can say, well, I don't really need to do that because I can tell the solicitor. And that's great, because you can tell them one set of things, and then your seller may go and tell the solicitor what you think you've agreed, and it's a little bit different. And then what happens is that when you're dealing with the solicitors, if there's no written document that confirms what's all been agreed, there might be two different versions of what has been agreed. And then it just takes a lot longer, because the solicitors are writing to each other, trying to sort out what they think has been agreed. So obtain that written agreement. You can put together a template and have some of the simple kind of key elements of what you want in there. And if it's got additional points, you might just have a section for additional notes. So if it's just a standard sale agreement, if you normally just do a straightforward purchase, it's just going to have some of the really basic details, like I say, like the name and address of the seller and the buyer, the address of the property that's being purchased, the amount that you're purchasing it for, when you intend to complete, and you can add extra things to that if you agree extra terms. But once you've made that verbal offer, you might have tested it first before you've offered it, and then you go forward with your offer and they accept it. I'd really encourage you there and then, even if it's just on a blank piece of paper, to just write down what's been agreed. And whilst you're with the seller, just tell them, well, why don't I just make sure that we write this down and make a note of it, and then what we can do is use this to instruct our solicitors so that they both get the same version of events and there's no confusion. And that will help give confidence to the seller that you're about to move to the next stage already. So you're already on it, you're already moving quickly forward. So you're giving the seller confidence in you and also helping the process forward as well. So you write out the details whilst you're there, and then you can hand them the piece of paper and your pen and just ask them if they wouldn't mind just signing, check the details and just sign it at the bottom, date it so that they've confirmed that that's what's been agreed, and you'll sign it after them to make sure that is the agreement between both parties. And that will just help consolidate and confirm the details. It's not a legally binding contract, but it's certainly in your mind that is what you've agreed, and that's binding from an invert position where you've decided that that's what you've agreed, and the seller's decided what's agreed, and for a lot of people they won't go back on that and they won't start trying to negotiate it. Whereas if you don't have a written agreement, what you'll find sometimes is that sellers will change their mind, as they do, and that's their prerogative to do so. But if they've signed something, they are, in my experience, less likely to change their mind. Now you might say, well, I'm not always able to do that, I'm not always with the seller, and it might not be possible for you to get them to sign it there and then. So one of the things that you might want to use is an electronic signature format. Now, we use a company called EchoSign, that's ECHO, and the word sign, SIGN, and that's a company where you can get a few signatures for free, so you don't have to pay for a trial, certainly at this stage. But there are a number of different companies. I think there's a company called DocuSign, and there are a number of companies that offer this sort of service. So if you're at a distance or you haven't been able to write it up whilst you're there, you can always go away and write the document up, tell the seller that this is what you're going to do, that you're going to write up what you've agreed and just put it into a format, and then you'll send them a copy of that through a document signing facility in order for you both just to agree, and then you can use that document to instruct your solicitors. Now you could send it by good old snail mail and put it through the post, and that's absolutely fine. The challenge with that is obviously it'll take a day to get there, and then they get it and they're busy, and they've not quite on with it, and you've just got to wait for it to come back. And it is a little bit the same when you send it electronically. You've got to wait for it to come back. But there's a couple of advantages with that. A lot of people nowadays are using electronic stuff much more. So they're on their emails and they're into, much more instant information. So by sending it electronically, you're sending it to their email, it'll be sitting there, it'll be reminding them daily that it's there. And it's really easy for them to go on and just read the document, check it, make sure they're happy with it, and they'll be able to create an electronic signature. So the system can either automatically create one for them, and they can accept that they're happy with that signature, or they can create their own one, and they'll be able to just confirm that that signature they're happy as being theirs. Once they fill the document out and sign it and submit it, certainly the system that we use keeps a format and a track of everything that's happened. So it'll tell you when the document's been created, it'll tell you when they first opened it, it'll tell you when they've signed it, it'll then come back to you if you've chosen to sign it after them, it'll come back to you for signature. And then once everyone's signed it, so there might be, let's say there's maybe two parties involved, and this is a good time to use it. Maybe there's a couple that have split up, and so they're not both together at the same time. This is a great way to do it because you can send it out electronically, and you can get one person to sign it, then another person to sign it, then a third person to sign it. You can put as many signatures on it as you want. And it's a really good way to do it if everybody's not together at the same time. So by getting that signed document, that means that you can then use that, and again, it's not legally binding, but you can use it to instruct the solicitors really quickly. You can just, once everybody's got a fully signed copy of the document, which it'll be, once everyone's signed it, it'll be sent to everyone, fully signed with all the trail of history of what's happened to the document, who opened it, who read it, who signed it, across the process. And all parties can then use that document to instruct the solicitors. And again, means that the solicitor has all the information there that they need to start preparing the paperwork. So what happens once you've instructed your solicitors? Well, for if you've used and purchased a property before, used solicitors, you might be very familiar with this process. But for those that haven't, I'll just explain in principle the sorts of things that happen when you instruct your solicitors. So if it's the first time that you're using your solicitor, then one of the things that you're going to be need to give them is that you're going to need to supply them with some documentation and ID of yourself. Even if it's not the first time that you've used them, you'll still have to confirm the terms and conditions paperwork that they send to you. So when you instruct your solicitors, they will send you a pack, and the same thing will happen for the sellers. So if the sellers are not used to selling property, then part of this process is not only about your education, but it's about you then being able to educate the sellers about what's about to happen next. So the solicitors will send you a pack, and the seller's pack will be slightly bigger because there's some additional documents in there, and we'll cover those in just a minute. But they'll send you some information that says, okay, thank you for your instruction. Here's our terms and conditions. We require your identification to say says you are who you are, and we'll also require some money to be put on account. And the reason for that is that the solicitors obviously don't want to lose money, because if you're instructing them and something happened to the deal and they've put time, money into it, then they want to make sure that they've got some costs covered. And predominantly it's for the searches that they're going to do on your property, because for some of the searches they'll have to pay for those searches up front. And what they don't want to do is they don't want to do that and then discover that you're not going to pay them for it. So it's a few £100s, it's not a lot, it's maybe £200 or £300 that you have to put on account for them. And you'll need to sign your documents to say that you agree to the terms and conditions and their general terms of business. And if it's the first time you're using your solicitor, you'll also need to supply them with some identification around who you are. And again, that's the same for the sellers. Now, obviously, you will work at your pace, and you'll get that information, and you'll get it, and you'll turn it around quickly. It's really important that you turn things around as quickly as possible, preferably within 24 hours, but I would say at least within 48 hours. Because the longer that it takes you to return documents, the longer it's going to take your solicitor to work the process. So really try and be prompt with the information that you send. And the other thing that you want to do is check that the vendors, the sellers, are doing the same thing, because they might have said that they want it to be done quickly. However, when they get a big pile of information from the solicitor, if they're not familiar with it, then what will happen is that they might feel overwhelmed. And when people feel overwhelmed, sometimes they just don't do anything with it. And so they might have got the pack and then thought, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to park it there for a minute. And then that minute suddenly becomes 3-4 days, and then a week, and then another week. So one of the things that's really critical is that you follow up with the vendors and you check that they're managing to complete the paperwork. You might even offer to go and help them, because they will get additional information that they have to complete. So they'll get two documents that they'll need to complete around the property information. So they'll need to complete information about the property itself, and that could be in relation to the boundaries of the property. So who's responsible for which boundary at the front and the back of the property, and things about the property that they might have done. So have they changed anything? Have they had any planning that they'll have to provide documents for? Have they, changed the windows, changed the boiler, again, that they might have to provide documents for? And they have to fill out all that information on a property information form. They'll also have to complete things like, the suppliers of the utilities. And that's because that information has to come to you. Now, you might say, well, they've already told me all of that, I don't need to know. It doesn't matter. The solicitors will still require them to complete that document in order that it can go through the legal process, and in order that they can have that verification in writing that that's what they've given as information, because it should be valid to the best of their knowledge at the time of selling the property. And that's why they need to complete it. So whilst you can't complete it for them, what you can do is go and maybe just help them understand it. And you can't influence it, but what you can do is just make sure that they sit down and they take the time to do it. So if you go and help them by just even being there to answer any questions, and the solicitor can answer the questions for them if they want to get any clarification and advice, they should definitely get that from the solicitor. But if they just want a little bit of moral support to help them get through that paperwork, and for it not to feel quite so daunting, you could offer just to give them some support to do that. The other document that they'll need to complete is around the fixtures and fittings. So it's about what they're actually going to leave at the property, and it goes through the property room by room. And they'll have to, tick some boxes and leave some comments around, are they going to leave the floor coverings? Are they going to leave the light fittings? Are they going to leave the curtains and or blinds? And what are the things that they are planning to leave fixtures and fittings wise around the property? And that all has to be documented so that you get what they agree for you to have with the property. And again, it's done room by room, so it's a fairly lengthy form. It doesn't take long to complete when they sit down to do it. But if they don't understand it before they even start on it, then sometimes people just don't even want to start on it. And that's why if you can talk them through what's about to come when they instruct the solicitor and the sort of information that they're going to get, then that will really help them see that it's not as daunting as it might first appear when they get this big pack from the solicitor. So by helping them and getting them to understand, that will help speed up the process. By offering some moral support, that will also help them. If they don't take you up on that moral support, you must make sure that how you check to see how they're getting on, because some sellers, believe it or not, even if they want to complete in a hurry, it can take them 3 and 4 weeks to complete this information and get it back to the legal team. So you've got to make sure that you take the responsibility to follow up and get that checked on, that they've completed that information and sent it back. Now, just looking back at some of the information around the money that you've sent to the solicitor, we talked about some of the searches that they might do. And so there are a number of searches that you'll potentially get done on your property. Not everyone does the searches that the solicitor might recommend. So the solicitor might recommend that you do a number of searches. You don't have to do all of them necessarily. And I'd recommend that you speak with your solicitor if you're not sure which searches to have done. You might want to speak with your solicitor just to check which ones would they recommend that you do. And that will really help you get to the point of understanding, what's important and what's not so important. If you need to leave any of them out, which ones should you consider leaving out? So for different areas, there are different things that you might need to check. So for example, in our area, one of the areas that we buy, there was salt mines previously. So if we're getting a mortgage facility or some lending facility on the property, then part of what the mortgage company require is that we do some salt mining searches. Now, if I was buying for cash, then it might be that I don't have to do that. I might want to do it, but I don't have to do it. Whereas if you're getting a mortgage in place, then there are some things that the mortgage company might require you to check. So there might be an environmental search to see if there's been any flooding in the area or any other environmental risk in the area that needs to be considered from the lender's point of view as to whether they lend you money or not. There will be a search to check that the owner of the property actually owns the property, because there is, believe it or not, property fraud where people try to take over other people's property without legally owning it and trying to sell it. So the solicitor will be required to check that the person who's selling you the property does actually own the property. There'll also be some searches around what's borrowed on the property. So if you've agreed to pay £100,000 for the property, the solicitor's actually got to check that that will clear all the debts on the property, because you don't want to be getting a property that potentially has debts that's going to be transacted and transferred across to you. That should never happen. Therefore, the solicitor's responsibility is to check that that's going to be the case, that it is actually going to clear all the debts. So all of those kind of searches and more often need to be done. And for most of those searches, there is a cost attached to them. For majority, not very much. They can be, £20–30, but the solicitor doesn't want to be out of pocket for those, and that's why in most cases you will be required to put some money down on account so that they can go and conduct those searches and not worry about being out of pocket. So those are the kind of initial stages, and making that move quickly is really quite important. It's important that the vendor sees that you're acting upon it, and that's why by having that initial agreement and having something that you can instantly instruct the solicitors from, you can do that just simply by dropping off an email at the minute that you've got it all agreed. What are some of the other things that you might need to consider? We've just been talking about finance and if you've got a mortgage on the property. Well, you might want to organise a survey on the property. If you're using finance to purchase the property and the lender's giving you money, normally they will absolutely require you to have a survey done on the property. Now, in most cases, currently, the way that works is when you put your application in, they'll require you to pay to have that survey done. So you pay them and they will instruct the surveyor. So they've got usually a company or some companies that they work with in different areas that will do the surveys for them. And so therefore, whilst you pay for the survey, they instruct it and they get the people that they want because they trust that they will do a survey on the property that will meet their requirements to a degree, so that if they've checked that, you know, is the building solid, is there any issues with it they should be aware of, and they want to know that because obviously they're lending money on the property and they're not just going to take your word for it that it's standing up and that it's not going to fall down. So they'll get a surveyor to check the property and you'll get a copy of that report. Obviously you've paid for the report, you'll get to see what the survey says, and it's also important that you understand any potential works, because whilst the bank might be lending you the money, you'll still be putting money into it, and therefore you need to know that you're quite happy that the property that you're purchasing is as you expected it to be. Now, it could be that there's a problem with the property and you need to go back and renegotiate on price. If, let's say, there's some dry rot in the wood or something that you didn't know of, and maybe the sellers weren't aware of either, that's come up on the survey that requires you to go back and negotiate. So having a copy of that survey is really quite important. It could be that there's maybe a retention that the mortgage company are going to put on. So it's a simple problem, but they want it to be fixed. So they've said, well, you know, here's the survey, where they maybe put the mortgage offer out to you, but there are some restrictions. And we'll come on to the mortgage offer in just a minute, just to go through the workings of that and making sure that you have that offer in place. But getting that survey moving, it would normally take about a week to 10 days. So once you've put your full application in, it might take a few days, but it can take up to about a week to 10 days. But if you've not heard anything within a week about the survey happening and you've paid for it, I would chase it up. I would follow up and find out, when is the survey going to be organised? Because some companies are more proactive than others, and some of them will be straight onto it and you'll have a phone call within 24 hours and it's organised. And then other times you won't have heard for like a week, and you don't know when that survey is going to be. And again, that potentially is delaying the process. So really essential that you follow that up and you make sure that you understand when the survey is going to take place. With regards to checking and following up and moving it forward, I would recommend right at the outset that you, once you've agreed a deal, that you set in place in your diary some time to make weekly calls to your solicitors, and either weekly or fortnightly calls to the sellers. And you might say, well, why would I do that? I don't have anything to talk to them about every week. Well, that's not the point. The point is that solicitors, with the best will in the world, they want to do your transaction as quickly as possible. But they have a number of cases that they're dealing with. And therefore, they've got a caseload that they've got to get through. And if you're not checking on it, you're just slowly getting further and further down to the bottom of the pile. And if both solicitors are in the same position, no one's communicating backwards and forwards. And therefore, there's no one proactively dealing with it. And they will get to it eventually. But if you're calling up each week to find out what's going on and how far it's progressed, chances are your file's going to happen to be pulled out of the pile every single week, because they're going to have to look at it to respond to your questions. So where's it up to? Have we had that letter back? Are we moving it forward? How's the searches going? And the searches will take some time to come back. Some of them take a little bit longer than others. But if there are certain things that they should be doing and you're reminding them that weekly, something will happen on your file every single week. If you leave it for the solicitors to decide, and this is just because they're busy, it won't necessarily happen every week, and you just have to accept that. So you have to take responsibility for making sure that it continues to move forward. Because if it doesn't, and it goes on for months, then there's a chance that somebody else could come in, offer on the property, and if the seller's getting fed up with the process taking too long, they could offer on the property and realise that actually, I'm fed up with this, it's not going anywhere, we're not completing on it, I'm going to take someone else's offer and I'm going to move with them and see if they'll move faster. So the job is not done when the deal is agreed. The job is only done when you get it completed. Or the first part of the job is anyway done when you get it completed. So it's really important that you keep it moving every single week. So get your diary out and start to put those schedule some time in to put those calls in every week. Get your vendor, get your seller to also follow up with their solicitor. So if you're speaking to the seller either on a weekly or a fortnightly basis, make sure that they're also following up with their solicitor. You will be able to feedback how things are progressing. You won't be able to talk to their solicitor because obviously they're acting on behalf of the seller and they can't communicate with you if they're acting on behalf of the seller. So therefore, really essential that you communicate with the seller directly and that you make sure that they're following up with their solicitor and pushing it forward as well. So that the combination of both parties keeping it moving and keeping that communication flowing will really make sure that the deal keeps moving forward and you get it done in the fastest possible time. Now, there could be some issues and there might be some problems with it, so obviously the more that you're in communication, the more likely you're going to be aware of those and be able to fix them much, much faster. And one of the general problems that there can be is the mortgage offer. So sometimes people don't instruct the solicitors until they actually get the mortgage offer. And I can understand why that might be if you think there's going to be a risk that you might not, you're going to pay some money for the solicitors to be instructed and for that to start moving, and then you don't actually have a mortgage offer. However, I would recommend that, unless you're in some real serious doubt about the fact that your mortgage offer is going to be accepted, for a few £100, you could be 2 or 3 weeks further down the line if you get these solicitors instructed at the same time as you get the mortgage application in place. So, what are some of the challenges with the mortgage offer? Well, as I mentioned earlier, when the survey happens, then sometimes there are things that come up on the survey that you perhaps weren't expecting. And if the mortgage company or the lenders are not happy with certain things, they can say that they might put a retention on an amount of money, or they might decide to lend you less as a result overall. And that might require you to put more money in, and then you need to decide, is that going to be possible? Do I still want to do this? In the main, most things are fairly smooth, but you do sometimes get, if there's an issue with the property, let's say there's some kind of, like mentioned earlier, dry rot. Now, it could be that that's very fixable, but the mortgage company might say, well, we're going to retain, let's say, £5,000 until you fixed it. So not only do you need to find that extra £5,000, but you also need to find the money to fix the problem before they'll then release that £5,000. So it's definitely something that you need to consider. Make sure that the process moves forward. So if you have instructed the solicitor, make sure that you look at the survey when it comes back and check, keep chasing your mortgage broker and find out that the offer has come forward. Find out if there's any problems with it. Make sure that that offer comes through and that you get that in place before it gets to completion, well before it gets to completion, because you want to make sure that you're going to have the money to complete on the property. Now, whilst all this is going on, obviously, if there are some restrictions and there is some specific work that's been required on the property, then you are going to need to get some quotes for that. But equally, if you've got something that you plan to do with the property, you might want to obtain some quotes to get that work done. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. You might say, well, I haven't been able to get access to the property. You might be able to agree with the seller to get some access to the property before you complete in order to get some people round to quote on the property. It's certainly something that we've done on a number of occasions before, but sometimes the sellers don't want to allow you access, or maybe their solicitors advise that they don't give you access. I would say if you've built a good enough relationship with the sellers, there's a very strong chance that you could say to them, would you mind if I just get a couple of quotes for the work that we want to do? It will just help us make sure that as soon as you've moved out, we can actually get things moving quite quickly. And maybe just book in a couple of hours at the seller's property, and during that couple of hours, get a number of people round to quote on the work. I wouldn't recommend that you just get one person to come round at a time, because what happens if you've arranged with the seller and said, I want to come, is it all right? And they say yes, and you say, okay, well, we'll be there at 3 o'clock on Friday and my builder's coming round. Now, if you've got a very trustworthy builder, that's fantastic. But if you don't, and the builder that you've arranged to come round doesn't turn up, you've just gone to all the trouble of making arrangements with the seller. The seller's maybe taking some time out of work in order to be there, or, taking time out of something else in order to be there to let you in, and everyone's been let down. So I would encourage you to organise a couple of people, at least 2, maybe even 3, to come and give you quotes. Because if one person lets you down, maybe the other 2 will turn up. Or if 2 people let you down, you might get the 3rd person. So by getting a couple of people there, and that's why I would try and organise at least an hour, maybe 2, depending on how much work you actually need done at the property. But if it's just some simple stuff, an hour will be fine. And you can organise maybe one builder at 3 o'clock, another one at 3:15, then another one at 3:30. And you've got them 15 minutes apart, so you can show them around, tell them what you're looking for, and they can make some notes, and then the other one arrives and you can do the same with them, and so on and so forth. Maybe 15 to 20 minutes apart, so that you can keep it moving, and then you can ask them to come back to you. And that will help you get things moving for you, so that you don't have a lot of time between completion and then being able to organise any work that you need doing on the property. Because if you do have that gap, you've got to pay for it. You'll be paying for the finance that you're borrowing, because you'll be paying for it from the day that you buy it. So the faster that you can move with things like this, the more you will find that you can move it forward much quicker to either point of sale, if you're buying and selling, or if you're tenanting, you'll be able to move it forward to getting it tenanted much, much faster. And you'll get those quotes in beforehand. You can organise, you can even line up the date that the work's going to start. So that's what I would do in order to make sure that you are always staying ahead. Keep following it through every week, and also get ahead of the game in terms of moving it forward. Some of the other things that you'll need to do in order to get to completion is that you'll need to obtain buildings insurance before you complete. Now, if you're getting a mortgage or some lending on it, these companies generally insist that the legal teams get copies of the documentation. If you're buying with cash, then the solicitors are not likely to ask you for copies of your insurance documents. But if you have got some lending in place, it's 99% likely that they will want to see a copy of your buildings insurance documentation. So how do you organise that before? Well, obviously, if this is the first time you've done it, or even if it's not, you might have to contact the insurance companies, give them some information on the property, and get some quotes. If you've already got a portfolio insurance, so once you've got a few properties, you can put all your properties onto a portfolio. And it makes it really easy for you to just add new properties to that portfolio insurance. You just put in a phone call, you maybe need to fill out a 1-page document to give them some information on that property, and they will add that to your portfolio. They'll send you the relevant information that you can send on then to your solicitor. But if you're doing your properties separately, you might have to phone up a couple of companies, get quotes, and then you'll have to organise when it's actually going to complete. So you need to understand the date of completion. It's normally on a Friday. Most solicitors tend to complete properties on a Friday. That seems to be the day that the majority of the transactions go through. So you might call up on the Monday, start getting the quotes, getting the information that you need, tell them that it's intended to complete Friday and that you'll need the documentation, the copy of the certificate sent back to you by the Wednesday or the Thursday. So once you instruct them and say, yes, I want the insurance to be put in place, you might put it in place from Friday morning or maybe midday, depending on when it might complete. If you're not sure, you might want to just start it from the start of the day or on the day that it's supposed to complete. And making sure that you get a copy of that certificate and you get it over to your solicitor. Do not rely on the insurance company sending it to the solicitor. You can ask them, and most companies will do it, and you give them the details, but always check that the solicitor has had a copy of it. Because if that is the only thing that then holds up your completion, you'll be really frustrated with yourself because you didn't check. And because one person maybe got the wrong email address or didn't quite get it through. It's highly unlikely that you wouldn't be able to do it last minute, but you really don't want to be running around last minute on a Friday chasing up the building's insurance information, because that can be so easy just to rectify beforehand. So in the main, it might be better for them to send it to you. You know you've got it, you've got a copy of it, and then you just forward that on to them. And mostly they can do that by email. They'll send you out the full documentation in the post, and that's usually after the insurance starts. But they can email you a copy that gives you a copy of it to make sure that you know that you're insured and that's what you said you wanted, and then you can forward that email on to your solicitor, and then you will be sure that they have that in time. A couple of other things that you want to make sure for the week of completion is that, understanding that there are things that need to be done just immediately before you complete. Now, sometimes this can be done a little bit in advance, but what you'll find is that most solicitors, I don't know why, but it gets left right to the last minute. And there's various documents that you will need to sign, usually 24 to 48 hours before you complete. And you need to make yourself available to sign those documents, either in person or getting them sent over to you by email, by post, getting them signed and getting them back. Now that might sound really simple. You think, well, that's not difficult. But if you've decided that you're away on business for a couple of days and you're not there and it needs to be, printed out and signed and filled out, and you need a witness signature, or you work for yourself and you work in your own office and there's no one else around and you need to get the signature witnessed, you've got to make arrangements for that. You've got to make sure that you can get out, you can get someone to witness it, and you can move it forward. I mean, we've had documents on a Thursday night that have got to be back for Friday morning. And if I'm in the office working by myself and I'm getting a document at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night, and it needs to be printed, signed, witnessed and sent back to the solicitors by the next morning in order that it can be done, then you've got to make sure that you can get access to people to witness your signature. So just be conscious of the fact that you've got to give yourself some availability to tidy up and finish and do anything that needs done in the last 24 to 48 hours before you complete. The other thing that you need to do is you need to arrange to collect the keys on completion. You want to make sure that if you're completing on the Friday, that you can pick up the keys, or they can maybe be delivered to the solicitor and you can pick them up from there. You don't want to be in a position where you've forgotten to arrange to collect the keys. So you can make the arrangements with the seller beforehand. I would encourage you to maybe make it later in the day. So it could be that the solicitors tell you, well, we're going to complete by 12 o'clock on Friday. And you make arrangements to meet with the seller at 1 o'clock on Friday. And that's great. However, it doesn't always go to plan. And therefore, you might be sitting around at their property because they won't give you the keys until the money's changed hands and everything's completed. You might be sitting at the property for 2 or 3 hours waiting for everything to go through. And that can be quite frustrating and time wasting. So I would suggest that you know, even if you're due to complete at lunchtime, that you perhaps don't arrange to collect the keys until maybe 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Because then if it is delayed a little bit, you know that it's going to be completed. And you can check, and the solicitor will probably phone and tell you, you know, or you'd hope they do, or certainly encourage them to call you when it has completed so that you can go and pick up the keys. But you can check. If it completes early, it doesn't matter. You can still stick to the arrangement. You've already pre-made it with the seller that you're going to pick up the keys 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And they'll know they're able to give it to you because it has already completed. Or, like I said, you could get them just to drop it off either with their solicitors or your solicitors once the transaction has completed. If you're not able to be there on the day, and then you can go and collect it from them either later that day or perhaps on the Monday morning. Alternatively, you could ask somebody else, a friend, colleague, to go and collect the keys for you at a particular time. But you do need to make sure that it is going to be giving you plenty of time for that money to have changed hands, because if there's any delay, the seller will not give you the keys because they'll be advised by the solicitor, quite rightly, not to give you the keys until it's fully complete. An additional thing that you might want to consider, and this is just from some experiences that I've had on completion, is things like, well, if you expect to get the property empty and they've said what they're going to leave in the property, we have had occasions where, how do you describe it? Maybe where you're buying a property from somebody who's a bit of a hoarder and they keep a lot of things in their property, and you will identify them. It's generally where you know, when you go to see the property and there are rooms that you just can't get in because there's so much stuff in them. And that's somebody who generally, not always, but generally, it's because they've hoarded things over the years. Now, in my experience thus far, there are occasions when those people decide to move and they're maybe downsizing, or you know, they're moving to another property that's maybe just as big, but at this point they've decided to have a little bit of a clear out. But unfortunately, that clear out doesn't involve removing the items from the property. And what happens is that you complete, you pick up the keys, you go into the property, and you realise that the seller has left you with lots of things that belong to them, and they've now decided to leave them for you. And that's great if there's, you know, something valuable in it, maybe. But actually, realistically, it's not great at all, because it's just usually lots of junk, things that they don't want, things that are broken, you know, just lots of stuff that you don't need, and stuff that's going to cost you time and money to get rid of, and things that you weren't expecting, a delay that you weren't expecting. If you've lined up your builders to come in from Saturday morning and you open the doors to this house full of stuff, you've now got to arrange for all of that to be cleared out before your builders can start. Now, it does happen fairly rarely, but the clues for me are generally in the way that they keep the property before you buy it. And as I said, if it's a property where you go and you're looking around and there's loads of things in it, there's rooms that you just can't get in because they've just kept things over the years, you will find, in the main, in my experience, that they will leave you stuff that they didn't want. And they don't want to be bothered to clear it out either, or go to the cost of clearing it out, so they just lock the door behind them and leave it for you. Now, there are ways that you can combat that. If you're concerned about that, you can ask your solicitor to do a retention of funds, because you're concerned about whether they'll leave the property as they've said they're going to leave it. Now, you will need to release those funds fairly quickly and check that on completion that the property has been completely cleared. And in my experience, if you do retain those funds, let's say you said, well, I want to keep back £1,000 to make sure that the property has been cleared. And once I've checked it's cleared, the solicitor can then release those funds. Now, the seller's not going to be particularly happy about that, but if you've got a genuine concern that they might leave things in the property, which I have had in the past, and I've had genuine concerns subsequent to that, that even although they've said to me, yeah, absolutely, we'll clear the property, and it doesn't happen, this is something that we've started to do, is to put a retention to make sure that the property is left as they said they were going to do it. And then go and check the property. If it's left clear, then the money gets released and they get their extra £1,000. And believe me, if you're holding on to £1,000 of their money, there is a strong chance that they're going to make sure that the property is completely cleared because they want that money back. If they can't be bothered, they'll leave £1,000 for you, and you've then got money that will cover the clearance of that property, which often can need a skip and a couple of people to do it. So it'll cost you a bit of money to do it. So don't think £1,000 you're going to make money, because it will actually cost you to clear it, because they'll leave you stuff for you to clear. So that's worth considering if you come across situations like that, so that you make sure that you get the property in the condition that you thought you were going to get it in. And if you don't, then you've at least got some money there to rectify it. If they do leave things in, you've got to keep that money. You do need to take some pictures. Best to take the evidence, send them across to your solicitor, show them the pictures of the property and the condition that's been left in, so that they can then use that to talk to the other solicitor and agree that the funds are going to need to be kept in order to clear the property. So there's just a couple of little tips around making sure that on the day of completion that you're there, you're ready to complete, you know that you've got some facility in there if there is a problem with it, that you can use that money to fix the problem. The other thing that you might want to consider as well is, if you're going to let your property, then you might want to get ahead of the game. You might want to start thinking about that. If you've got a property that's in pretty good condition and you're just going to turn it around really quickly, you might want to be thinking about starting to advertise that property just before you complete. So if you can't get access to do viewings with tenants, then you won't want to advertise it too early. If they will allow you access, if you've got a good relationship, and we've done this a number of times before, where we've got a good relationship with the seller, maybe the property's already empty and we're just waiting on the legal process going through, and they will allow us access to show tenants round. Once we've understood the completion date, and you do need to be a bit careful just in case there's a problem on completion, but you can line tenants up to move in pretty quickly once it's completed. If you don't have access, you can maybe make sure you get some pictures, and even if it's just a case of getting the advert ready to press go with, then obviously that will help you. Now, if you've got an agent involved, there's a chance that the likelihood is they're not going to advertise it before it's completed. It's very rare that would ever happen. There are some agents that will work with you if you've got good relationships with them, and they might start to just tempt people with it a little bit if they've worked with you a lot and they know that it's not going to be a problem. So if you're using an agent, if they can't get them to advertise it or start to preempt people that might be interested, then make sure that you at least line them up quickly to get in as soon after you've completed as possible. And if you're doing it yourself, get the advert ready. Use that time beforehand. Don't wait till it's done to get things moving. If you haven't got the pictures, at least do the write-up so that you can get it advertised really quickly. You just go and take the pictures. You pick up the keys, you go in, you check it out, take a few pictures, get them on the website and get it advertised. And that way, you will not only see it through to completion, you'll get it moving so that it's already starting to focus on making you the money that you set out for it to make you. So really important that you keep it moving forward and that you make sure that it's all going to come together and you're going to see it through to completion, and that you don't give up once you've done the deal, because that's really just the beginning of it. So what are your actions from this session? From this session, what we're going to do is I want you to be really active with your weekly lead generation. You need to be making sure that you're generating those leads on a weekly basis. In order to get deals through to completion and close deals, the only way that you can do that is if you're generating new leads and new opportunities on a regular basis. So I would say that if you're really active and you're going for a big goal here, you need to be viewing at least 2 properties every week that are of interest to you. Things that are really going to be striking for you, that are going to be potential opportunities, you need to be seeing at least 2 of those a week. So get generating those leads so that you can see the deals and you can start working on closing those deals. Get familiar with the sale agreement, the heads of terms, whatever it is that you're going to use to close your deals. Familiarise yourself with the paperwork. Imagine yourself sitting there, complete one as if you've already completed a deal. You don't want to be sitting in front of a seller and doing it for the first time. You need to make sure that you are completing on that agreement paperwork for the second, third, fourth time when you're sitting with a seller. So if you're new to this or you've not used agreements before, make sure that you practice them before you get an actual deal that you're going to agree on. So your action is start working on your paperwork, sit down and complete a set of paperwork, and let's make sure that you know what you're doing and you look professional and you know what to do with it. Build your team. Establish 2 more contacts that you can put into your team. You need to have a really strong team of people around you. So making sure that you've got good contacts and people that will work with you on things. Get good buildings insurance. Get a good builder if you haven't got one. If you're going to use a letting agent, get letting agents on board so that you can work with them to get your property advertised at the earliest possible opportunity. Make sure that you've got buildings insurance company that will instantly start to give you the best quotes. If you've got a buildings insurance policy already, make sure that they're active with giving you the information as quickly as possible so that you can do things very last minute if you need to. So add 2 more people to your contacts, people that you can trust, people that will work with you, and make sure that you're building the team of people around you to build a strong team for you to act quickly and move quickly on your transactions. Those are the actions that I'd recommend that you take now and move yourself forward in your journey, making sure that you're giving yourself the best opportunity to find the best deals, complete on them, and see them through all the way to completion. I look forward to talking to you in another Property Mentor module. In the meantime, crack on with your actions and have fun doing it.